Good evening, everyone, brothers and sisters out there watching on Fox Wave. I am Toney Mitchell, and this is In the Mix with the Mitchells. I'm representing the Perfect Family Blend, where our mission is to build, nurture, and keep blended families together. As you might see right now, I'm soloed. So this is a big surprise because my beautiful wife, Sanita, she is here in the studio with me. But this session tonight is all about the fellas. It's all about the husbands. It's all about the men. And we're going to have a great show on tonight. So the first thing I want to say is thank you so much for your love and your support, being with us and supporting us as we launch this new broadcast In the Mix with the Mitchells as part of the Perfect Family Blend. We continue to share the information out there, continue to push it out because we got some great information, not only tonight, but we got great information coming up for the whole year of 2019. One of the things that I want to say is every third Thursday, you can look forward to the session being strictly for the men. And I want to also mention that I have officially launched the Husband's Playbook. And you might be wondering, what in the world is the Husband's Playbook? Well, I'm here to tell you exactly what it is. The Husband's Playbook, when you think about a game, think about football. We're in the playoffs right now. So what is the best playbook that you can have as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a friend? The Bible. That is the best playbook you can have because it's going to help you from an offensive standpoint. It's going to help you from a defensive standpoint. It's even going to help you from a special team standpoint. So when you have the Bible and you are equipped as a man and you know that word and you deep in that word and you studying that word, everything around you just becomes better because you are staying grounded in the true creator, the person who created you in the first place, God. So with the Husband's Playbook, our vision is helping husbands to love and protect their marriage just as Jesus Christ loved the church. Jesus Christ loved the church. Who's the church? We're the church. How much did he love us? He sacrificed everything. He sacrificed his life. He sacrificed everything for us. So as men, we have to look at this at the same perspective. We have to sacrifice ourselves daily to make sure that our marriages are staying intact. We have to make sure that we're sacrificing things that keeps our family intact. So this is what the Husband's Playbook is all about. And it's not just for this session of In the Mix with the Mitchells. It is an actual organization that is launched this month. So you can look us up on Facebook, the Husband's Playbook. Look us up on Facebook. Be a part of that group. It's strictly for the men, husbands, and men who desire to be husbands one day. You could definitely be a part of this group. So I'm not going to go any more with that. This show is going to be awesome. We're going to cover some of the things we talked about for the past two sessions of In the Mix with the Mitchells. And one of those key things was communication. We talked about last week communication, how the husband and the wife need to be on the same page when it comes to communication. We talked about how the parents need to be in wavelength with the children as far as communication, even staying in wavelength, staying in same space as talking with the co-parents, keeping that open line of communication. And what were some of the key points that we talked about from last week? We talked about, in regards to communication, we said to include your spouse in all communications. Don't catch your spouse off guard. Communicate everything. Be transparent about what you're actually talking about and what is really going on. Because if your spouse is caught off guard, that can cause a whole lot of issues in your marriage and everything else. So include your spouse in all communication. The second thing is establish clearly defined boundaries. That's huge. You can't let everyone in your business. You can't let everyone speak on your marriage. You can't let everyone speak on your children. You can't let certain things, you got to establish those boundaries, especially sometimes with the co-parent. You got to let them know, hey, you can only go so far, and this is the draw line right here. But that all centers on speaking and communication, and each and every one of you been on the same page. So Make sure you have those defined boundaries. Then monitor the conversations that you have with your co-parents. This is huge. I'm being real transparent about this. I was always the one that communicated in a favorable manner when it came to one of the co-parents that we have for one of our sons. And I didn't say anything negative while my son was around. However, I spoke negative to him when me and my spouse talked about certain situations. I had to cut that out. In order to build a relationship and to think of the greater good, which is our son, I had to make sure that I check myself and make sure that I start speaking positive, start speaking life into that co-parent's life. Because guess what? We're going to talk about this tonight. Your words have power. Your words have power. What you say, what does the Bible say? There's life and death in the power of the tongue. You got to make sure that you say the right things, and you got to make sure that you're speaking life into every situation, everything that's connected to you. So that's monitor your conversations. And then the last thing, listen more than you talk. I know this is hard for some people. This is hard for some situations. Hey, it's hard for me sometimes to just really listen and not be instant to speak on something. But it's necessary because when two people are talking at the same time, guess what? Nothing is being communicated. You're missing the point. You're having misunderstandings, and basically you're going to have frustrations associated with that. So you got to make sure that you listen. Hearing and listening are two different things. So make sure you listen, because when you listen, it brings clarity to what you're actually doing. So that is just a recap of what we talked about last week. So this week, we're going to still center on communication, but we're also going to focus on it from a man's perspective, from a husband's perspective. So when we do that, since this is the husband's playbook, we're going to go to the playbook, which is the Word of God. So when it comes to communication, I thought about this verse. I was kind of teetering-tottering about which verse I was really going to go on, and I really chose this one because I think it really brings home the point of what we talked about last week and what we're also going to focus on this week. And it comes from James chapter 1, verse 19. And I thought I wrote it down. Oh, I did. And it says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath." Let me say that again. That is James, 1st chapter, 19th verse. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. And I'm going to say it again. "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." So that is going to be the whole foundation. That's going to be the whole premise of what we're actually talking about tonight. So, centering on this particular scripture, what can we really learn from this? Well, we got some key points associated with that. We got 3 key points associated with it. It's all in this scripture. And it says, the first point is, be swift to hear. That's very important. And that really goes back to what we were just saying is, you got to listen. You got to listen to hear what your spouse, what your children, what the co-parent, what your godparents, what your grandparents. You got to listen to what is being said. Swift to listen. That means that you're being attentive. That means you're being intentional. That means you're giving your full, undivided attention to the person who's actually speaking. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example. Okay, for me, on my job, I go through so many meetings. I probably average on a daily basis, I probably average about 5 to 6 meetings a work day. So that is a lot of time spending hearing people talk all the time. If I'm not doing the briefing myself, I'm hearing people talk all the time. So it gets to a point where I'm just tired of just listening, and I just start hearing. And when you hear, that means you're not really fully paying attention to what the person that's speaking is actually saying. What you're really doing is you're just trying to find the key things in what they're saying that you could grasp hold to in order to kind of draw your own conclusion. Now, the conclusion that you might draw, it might be the right conclusion, but then sometimes there's been times where I made a conclusion about something and it really wasn't the right conclusion. It was really kind of out of the scope of what the person was actually saying. But that's because I wasn't listening. That's because I was just hearing the person. Listening brings clarity to a situation. Hearing brings dysfunction. And when I say dysfunction, I mean when you hear, you're hearing bits and pieces. You're only hearing little tidbits of what is being said. And then, too, it's almost kind of disrespectful when you just actually hearing a person. Because when you hear someone, you hear what they're saying, but you might be on your phone. You might be watching TV. You might be doing something else, but you're not really fully intently giving your full attention to that person. So that's really kind of rude. So make sure that you're intentional in order to gain understanding of what the person that's communicating with you is actually trying to convey. Then the next thing, listening, and this is very important for men. This is very important. Listening does not always equate to fixing something. Let me say that again. Listening does not always equate to you, man, fixing something. What I mean by that? We men, we're natural born fixers. We hear a problem, and then once we hear a problem, our instant response is, okay, what do you need me to do to fix the situation? Especially when it comes to our spouses. When your spouse comes to you and says, hey, I experienced X, Y, and Z problem, that man, he is ready to step into action. Okay, what you need me to do? We basically, after I need you to, we pretty much don't hear much of anything else. After that, we're ready to go into action to try to fix something. But here's the key caveat that I've learned, and I've learned this in 9 years of marriage. Sometimes when your spouse comes to you and presents a problem to you, they really are not asking you to fix anything. Your wife has pretty much figured out, hey, I already have the solution to the problem. I'm just letting you know as a situational awareness of what is really going on with me so that you, again, are not caught off guard when the situation arises. I had to learn this, and it's been plenty of times I've learned this the hard way. But I've learned it, and I'm still growing at it. It's still times where I'm just like, hey, is this something that you really want me to fix, or is this something that you're just telling me? But in that, you have to ask clarifying questions. And that only comes if you're actually listening to your spouse, if you're listening to your children. Because, hey, guess what? Sometimes children, they'll tell you something that's wrong, and they'll have a solution themselves about what it is they need to actually fix. So just keep that in mind. Listening doesn't always equate to you fixing something. And then the last thing we're going to cover on this first point is listening requires patience. You can't rush a person that's communicating with you to get to the point. I have a very bad habit of this. Very bad. I'm more of a person that's like, give me the executive level, give me the high level, just tell me the bullet points, and then I could just go from there. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you have to hear the full picture before you can actually understand the full spectrum of what is really going on. So you can't really rush the process. You have to be able to listen to the whole story patiently, intently. That way you can gain the full picture. So that's the first point. And we're going to take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we're going to go to our second point. And you are listening right now to In the Mix with the Mitchells. All right, welcome back to In the Mix with the Mitchells. I am Toney Mitchell, and my beautiful wife, Sanita Mitchell. She's here in the building, but this is a session all about the men, the husbands, the men on today. So I just want to point out too, if you have a question or a comment, I know we're on Instagram Live, we're on Facebook Live, but if you actually want to call into the studio, the number to dial is 240-719-2560. I'm going to say that again. The number is 240-719-2560. And again, this is a session for the husbands, for the men, and we are covering communication, which is a piggyback of what we actually talked about last week, which was communication between your husband and your wife, between your children, your co-parents, everyone else involved in your blended family. So what we said is the foundation of today's conversation about communication was James, 1st chapter, 19th verse, which says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." I'm going to say that again. "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." So, our first key point that we covered before the break was we must be swift to hear, which means we must be swift to listen. Listening means we're intentional in what we're hearing from our spouse or from our children or from anyone else that we communicate with. It doesn't always equate to fixing something. When we listen, sometimes the solution is already picked out. Sometimes the solution is already done. We just being brought up to speed, situational awareness. So it doesn't always mean we're trying to fix something when we're listening intently. And then the last thing, listening requires patience. You have to be patient when you're listening to the person who's communicating with you, because you might want the high-level executive summary, but sometimes you have to hear the whole story to get the full picture of what is actually going on. So now we're going to touch on the second point, which is slow to speak. Slow to speak. This is definitely a challenge, because in human nature, when someone comes to you, especially when they're coming to you and they're providing constructive criticism, and I mentioned constructive criticism, or even sometimes they're just criticizing you. They're saying something that you're not doing. Our natural reaction is to correct them right then and there before they can finish their sentence out. Is to step right in and defend yourself. We're in defense mode. So sometimes that's not always the best method to go in. We have to be slow to speak. So what does that actually mean from that perspective? Well, being slow to speak means think before you speak. What does that mean by that? So when a person is saying something to you, we're already starting to put our defense together. However, when you rapid fire speaking, when someone says something to you, you might miss the whole point, or you might say something that's incorrectly inappropriate for that particular portion. So, slow to speak. That means you're putting your thoughts together. That means when the person that's speaking to you, you're receiving the information. Then you're processing what is actually being said. And then here's one of the things that I would ask sometimes is, okay, I heard you say this. Is this really what you meant? Clarify. If you're not clear, even when you're listening to your spouse or your children, I say this all the time to my children. Hey, what did you really say? That lets them know I'm listening to them. And then I want to make sure that I give them the right response, because I don't want to give them the wrong response and then they go run wild doing something else they're not supposed to be doing. So think before you speak. And the reason why we think before we speak is because here's another thing, your words. I think we underestimate, the saying, sticks and stones break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Well, guess what? That is a lie. Words do hurt. And We have power in the words that we speak. When we uplift someone who might be down in the dumps, that brings that person up. When we encourage someone to move forward in their dreams or move forward and doing something that might be totally out of their scope, that uplifts them. When we communicate with our spouses, when we communicate with our children, when we communicate with the co-parents, when we communicate with anybody that's associated with us, when we keep that positive line of communication going, that means everyone is gaining some form of benefit. Everyone is gaining some treasure that is being said. But if we're tearing each other down by the words we speak, guess how many, who's going to be uplifted? What's going to be in the result of that? So you have to realize that your words have power. So think before you speak. Think about, process it. Really trying to understand what is being said to you. Because sometimes, I know for me, if my wife comes to me and says, hey, you're kind of missing the point in X, Y, and Z, at first I might be a little angry. I might, get a little offended. Hey, let's just keep it real. And I might get in my feelings. But then as I really start to listen and really start to process it, then I start to see, you know what, I have been kind of missing the mark in this particular area. I have been, not doing really everything that I should be doing from a husband and fatherly perspective. So you take that information and then you turn it into a positive, and then guess what? Everybody wins. So that's on the part of being slow to speak. Now, let's go to the other portion of this. Slow to wrath. Now, I had to really think about this. I had to really digest this, because when you think about wrath, that's like the ultimate extreme. So there's a difference between wrath and there's a difference between anger. So anger means, and this is the definition of that, the definition of anger is a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. So you're going to get angry. I mean, that's just a human characteristic. You're going to get angry. Your spouse is going to your spouse is going to make you angry at some point. Your kids going to make you angry. Your co-workers going to make you angry. Hey, your co-parents might make you angry. I mean, it's just going to happen. It's just part of life. However, your anger is just a healthy means of really, expressing an emotion. So when you're angry, the Bible says it's okay to be angry, but don't sin. What does that mean? That means when you're angry, don't allow that sin to fester inside of you and that anger turns into something else. Because the anger that you have might be a temporary feeling, but if you hold on to that anger is going to turn into something else. And speaking from experience, it's been times where I was angry at a situation and I held that anger, just held on to it. Don't you realize that it takes more energy to stay mad at someone than to actually reconcile with the person? It takes a whole lot of energy to just stay mad at someone for a long period of time. And it could be something very simple. And then by the time you finally realize, you're ready to let go of this anger, you totally forget what you were really angry about in the first place. So please, it's okay to be angry, but just let that anger go. Reconcile it quickly, be done with it, and just move on. Now, the definition of wrath. Now, this is, to the next level. So the definition of wrath is strong, vengeful anger. I'm going to say that again. The definition of wrath is strong, vengeful anger. So what does that mean? That means you're intentionally trying to hurt someone. That means it doesn't matter who it is. It could be your spouse. It could be your children. It could be anybody. You are spitefully trying to hurt that person. That is to the extreme. Wrath. That's totally different from being angry at someone. Wrath means that you're saying words that will hurt your spouse. You're saying words that you know will hurt your children. You're saying words that you know will upset a lot of people that are connected to you, and you just don't care because you're in that mode of wrath. That means it can also lead to physically doing something that you know is going to hurt someone. So wrath, we can't allow anything to get to that point where we're at that point of just expressing wrath towards anybody, because that is not the way we handle things as individuals. So why does the Bible say slow to wrath? Because it's a process. It's a process, just like we mentioned. You get angry with a person, then you hold on to that anger, and then the anger turns to hate, then the hate turns into wrath. Because when you hate something, then that pushes you to action to do something. We don't want to get to that point. We want to kill that root right at the root. We want to kill that right now. We don't want to even plant that seed, because anger or anything, you get the devil a foothold in your marriage, you get the devil a foothold in your family, he's going to run rampant in that. So we have to kill that whole aspect of wrath. So what are some of the things that you could do to kind of minimize your anger? Well, first thing you could do is step away. If you feel that your anger is starting to get to the point where you can't control yourself, or you're starting to think things, or you just really just want it starts to get at a level that you know is uncontrollable, step away from the situation. I know there have been times on my job where I've been so angry because, truth be told, I was thrown under the bus, that I actually had to step outside, take a walk, and just cool down. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with stepping away from a potential argument, or if you're in the midst of an argument. Because two people yelling at each other, what are you going to resolve? Pretty much nothing. So walk away from the situation, cool down, and then once you cool down, guess what will happen? It gives you an opportunity to clearly think about what really just transpired. And once you start to really assess what transpired, and you really start to think about, okay, how did it get to that level, and why were we even arguing, or why were we even angry in the first place, then you can start to reassess where you're actually at. And then you could go back to that person once you calm down, and that person is calmed down, and then you can have a very great conversation, communicating properly. So that's the first thing you could do. And then the next thing you could do is try not to respond in anger. I will admit this is sometimes hard to do. There have been times where I've been in a situation and I responded in anger. Now, it might have made me feel good at that particular time to respond in that particular situation in anger, but then it really just drove the stake in even deeper in trying to dig out of the hole. So try not to respond back in anger. When, the saying goes, hurt people. This is a classic situation of that. You don't want to hurt anyone because you think someone just hurt you, or they actually did hurt you. Revenge is not bittersweet. Revenge is not for you to take upon yourself. So always try not to retaliate against your spouse. Try not to retaliate against your children. Try not to retaliate against your co-parent. Even though sometimes it might get to a situation where you really want to retaliate against them because, X, Y, and Z. But that's not your place to actually do that. So try not to respond in anger. And then it's funny because we're talking about this, and then guess what the next verse, James chapter 1, verse 20, guess what that says as it pertains to what it said, wrath. It says, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Wow. Let me say that again. That's James chapter 1, verse 20, and it says, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Men, you have to realize that you are the priest of your household. When it comes to the order, it's God, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, the husband, and the wife, then the children. So, when you look at that perspective, when you look at that hierarchy, you're the first direct line from God to you. So, if you're reacting in wrath, if you're reacting in anger, if you're doing things that's contrary to what you're actually called to be, guess what? How that's going to affect your whole household. Guess how that's going to affect your marriage. Guess how that's going to affect your children. It's a domino effect. So you have to keep this in mind. Wrath of any kind does not produce anything that's righteous. It doesn't produce anything, no good fruits whatsoever. It doesn't produce anything that's worthy of mention. So we have to make sure that we stay in line to keeping our anger under control. And then the final thing is seek to resolve the matter immediately. And I'm going to come back on that one. So we're going to take another 5-minute break. This is In the Mix with the Mitchells. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to In the Mix with the Mitchells. I am Toney Mitchell, representing the Perfect Family Blend. And this session on tonight is strictly for the husbands, for the men, as we cover the topic of communication for a husband, for a father, for a man. Also, I want to point out that if you have a question or if you have a comment, feel free to dial in to the radio station here at Foxwave. The number is 240-719-2560. I'm going to say that again, 240-719-2560. And just to give you a recap, just in case you're joining us right now in this segment, we're focusing on communication, which is a piggyback off of what we actually talked about last week. So the foundation scripture that we used on tonight comes from James, the first chapter, verse 19. And it says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." Let me say that one more time. James, the first chapter, verse 19. "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." So, if just in case you missed the first portion of what we talked about earlier, we had 3 key points in regards to this particular scripture. The first point was we must be swift to hear, which means the equivalent of we must be swift to listen. So with that, we must be intentional in listening to gain clarity, to gain understanding. Then we must also remember, when we listen, it doesn't automatically mean that we're trying to fix something. Sometimes the solution is already done, or it's already been created, or it's already been thought of. Sometimes your spouse or sometimes your children are just coming to you and just letting you know for situational awareness. So remember, listening doesn't always mean that you have to fix something. And then the last thing for that first point is listening requires patience. You can't get the executive summary for everything that your spouse, that your children, that anyone that's connected to you might be saying. You can't get that executive level summary. You have to be able to hear the full picture before you could draw a conclusion and gain full understanding of what is really being said and what might be actually asked of you. So that's the first point. The second point of that is slow to speak. So when it comes to being slow to speak, that means we have to think before we speak. That means you have to digest what is actually being said to you. You have to analyze in your mind what is actually being said to you before you actually say something out of your mouth. The reason for that is because your words have power. So you don't want to say anything that might be contrary to what the person is actually communicating with you. So you have to make sure that you are understanding and ask clarifying questions. Ask, is this really what you meant? I heard this. Is this really what you're saying? It's nothing wrong with that, because that lets the person know that you're intently listening to what they're actually saying, which means they'll be more transparent and actually expressing to you what they actually might be trying to tell you. So remember that. Think before you speak. And then the other thing, I really kind of already highlighted on this, but I'm going to say it again. Words have power. Use them wisely. Whatever you say to your spouse, whatever you say to your children, your co-parent, whatever you say to your co-workers, so forth, whoever it may be, make sure that you choose your words wisely, because things could be taken out of context. And this is something that I just thought of. Sometimes certain words that you say might actually set a trigger in your spouse or in your children. So you have to be mindful of what words you can say to your spouse or your children and what words you can't say. Even if it might be a positive word, that word might mean something else to that person. So make sure that you choose your words wisely. So that was point number 2. So now we're on our third and final point, which is be slow to wrath. And we talked about the aspect of being angry and wrath. When you're angry at something or someone, that means you have a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. You might be annoyed at a person, but then that annoyance goes away over time. Sometimes very quickly, sometimes it might not go away as quickly. You might find some displeasure. You might find displeasure in your spouse, something that they might have done. You might find displeasure in your children. Hey, they haven't been turning in their homework as they should. They haven't been really, cleaning up, doing their chores as they should. So you're going to be angry from that perspective with them. But anger, if you allow it to fester, if you allow yourself to hold on to it, could turn to wrath. And what is wrath? Wrath is a strong, vengeful anger. That means you are intentionally trying to hurt the person that you have wrath towards. That's a very dangerous place to be in. You don't ever want to be in a place where you're experiencing wrath for someone. You don't ever want to unleash your anger towards someone in a physical or verbal way that diminishes that person, that degrades that person. You don't want to get to that level. So when you're angry with someone, what are some of the key points that we mentioned? One, we said step away from the situation. If you're angry with someone, step away. What does that do? That allows you to cool down, get your thoughts together, get your feelings in check, and then that allows you to reassess what it actually what caused you to have the disagreement, the argument in the first place. And then once you cool down, once you're able to clearly think about and articulate what just happened, then you're able to go back to either your spouse or you're able to go back to your children, and you're able to have a more effective communication with that individual, because now both of you are level headed. So also I want to point out, just because you might be at a point where you're cool and you're level headed, that doesn't mean that your spouse is at the same time at that same level of cool, I'm good, or your children are. Give them space. Give them time. The time it takes you to process something and get over your anger might not be the same time or process it takes for your spouse or your children or anyone else to get over their anger. So give them space. That's another key point that I want to point out. Give them space. And then once you both are cooled down and you both know that you're cooled down and you know there's peace, so to speak, in the land, then have that communication. And then go to the next thing, which is our next point. Try not to respond in anger. So if you're in the midst of that argument, if you're in the midst of that disagreement, do not respond in anger. Because when you respond in anger, you're typically going to say something that's going to hurt the person. You're going to say something that's going to further extend the anger. It might be something small that you might have a disagreement about, but if you're responding in anger, it can take that little small little thing and make it big, magnify it. Now you got more things on top of that. I can remember having a disagreement that turned into an argument that added more stuff on top of what we had a disagreement about, and then it just became just a mess. And guess what? In that mess, in that hole that we dug for ourselves, it took time to dig ourselves out of it. So you don't want to put yourself in a hole that you are too deep in, that you can't climb out of it. So don't respond in anger. And when we say that, we went to James, the first chapter, 20th verse, which says, "For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God." So we always have to remember we're connected to God. We're in his image. Yes, we're going to get angry. Now, I'm not going to say we're not going to get angry. I'm not going to say that, everything is going to be peachy keen. We're going to be living in peace with everyone. That's not realistic. However, what I'm saying is, when you're angry, try as quickly as possible to try to resolve whatever issues you have with the individual. Sometimes it means you're going to have to agree to disagree. But at least when you agree to disagree, now you're at a level of peace that you can move forward instead of staying put in the same situation that you're in. So that's that point. Now we're at the final point when it comes to slow to wrath. And that is, and I kind of already mentioned it already, seek to resolve the matter quickly. And why do I say seek to resolve the matter quickly? The longer you allow something to go unresolved, the longer you allow a matter to go with anger between family, anger between your spouse, anger between your children. That's just years of scarring that you're gonna have to try to fix. Well, really, you can't fix it. Only God can fix it. But just think about all that emotional scarring that you're gonna have to overcome to get back to the excuse me, to get back to the place where you used to be. Sometimes that's a long time. I know for myself, I allow wrath to directly affect my relationship with my father for a number of years. And it wasn't until I was fully grown that I actually reassessed the situation and realized I'm only hurting myself in regards to not speaking to my father or not trying to incorporate my father into my life. And I started to tear down my own wall so that I could open up that opportunity to allow my father to come into my life. And the one thing that I always say that I am so proud of, that I'm so grateful for, is that my father was there for my wedding. That was a very instrumental thing in my life. That was a huge moment in my life. Now, just think, if I allowed wrath to continue to control me in that regard and say, no, I'm not going to go there. No, I don't want to invite him. No, I didn't allow wrath to control me anymore. Because as I mentioned before, it takes a lot more energy to stay mad at someone than it does to reconcile with a person and to love that person. Loving someone is easy. Staying mad at someone is difficult. So, those are the key points that is made. And I just want to mention that my father and I, we're on great terms right now. He's a great grandfather, and I am truly thankful for him being in my life. And that's something that might be another topic that we tackle here for the men's session, because I just want to point out there are a lot of men that are out there right now who are hurting right now, grown men who are hurting because they haven't had that father figure in their lives, and they're seeking for that relationship. So that's probably going to be a topic that we're going to touch on probably later on in one of these sessions of In the Mix with the Mitchells. So just to recap, communication is so important in your life. You have to have communication. That's the way we interact with each other. When God made us, he made us to be relational people. So whether it's verbally or non-verbally, you have to communicate with people. And communication is so essential when it comes to your marriage, when it comes to your family. You can't deny its value in your life. So while we're communicating, we have to make sure that the communication that we express and the communication that we receive is beneficial for all parties. So how do you make sure that it's beneficial for all parties? One, you have to make sure that you're swift to hear. You have to make sure that you're slow to speak. And then you have to make sure that you're slow to wrath. So with that, that's all that I have, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you have gleanfully or gained something from this broadcast on tonight of In the Mix with the Mitchells, where we are focused on the men tonight, focus on the husbands, focus on the men who desire to be husbands one day, or in that process might be engaged to be married. So I want to congratulate each and every one of you, because as men, as husbands, we need to stick together. We need to communicate with each other. We need to glean from each other. And hopefully this forum and many other forums that we're going to establish through the Husband's Playbook is going to open up that dialogue in which we can iron sharpens iron. That way we can stay sharp with each other, that we can stay sharp in all facets of life that we experience, and then as we can collaborate. Hey, this is a big world. We can all learn from each other. So, once again, this is In the Mix with the Mitchells. I am Toney Mitchell, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining this broadcast. Next week, we're going to be back on this show 9:15, and it's gonna be a great show. I know it's gonna be a great show. You're gonna be in for a treat next week. I'm not gonna give all the details on it. Oh, okay. I can give the details. So next week is gonna be focused on the wives. So if you're a wife or you're engaged to be a wife one day, or you desire to be a wife, you do not want to miss next week's show, because Sanita is going to head that up, and she has a special guest that's going to come, and I'm just excited about that because I know that they are going to light it up. I know they're going to just do the thing next Thursday. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone on Facebook Live that joined in. Thank you everyone on Instagram Live that joined in. I am Toney Mitchell, in the mix with the Mitchells, where we say we're not perfect people, but we're perfect for each other. God bless you. See you next week.